A wise man once said, "All disease begins in the gut." This quote is attributed to Hippocrates, 2,000 years ago, plus or minus a few hundred. And this quote, though it is old AF, still makes the rounds today. I don't know about you, Amy, but I have seen this exact quote with a picture of like Hippocrates statue on Instagram posts, videos, and I've seen it in professional conferences and seminars. Naturopaths and functional medicine doctors love putting this quote up on the screen, but I, for one, think that this quote can lead us astray. And that's what we're going to be discussing in today's episode. Right, my dear?
Yeah. It is funny. I feel like it tends to be a good, like, aha quote. You know, I've seen it a lot, like what you're saying, in professional presentations or things like that, where it's like, oh, this quote from, like you said, thousands of years ago, and it still stands true today. And again, like, there's truth to it, but again, it does get overblown, and I don't know. I think the best word is it's just like it's overblown, and it really, I don't know. It leads people to focus solely on the gut instead of looking at other factors that are at play, and things that could be driving gut dysfunction could also be driving other disease. So it's like, is this really a correlation issue or a causation issue? And I think that that's where the problem lies in that quote, if that makes sense.
I also take issue with the word all.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
all disease
no
begins
nuance
in the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, like 100.00%. Like this is it, guys, the end. And, you know, I think we talked about this more recently off camera, but I think what happens oftentimes in my world, in like functional medicine and naturopathic medicine, is that people will get a full workup and like a holistic workup the first day, like the first appointment, right?
Right.
You go in to see a new naturopath and you're probably going to get like a hormone test, a GI map test, a SIBO test, a hormone. Did I say hormone? Yeah, hormone test, an adrenal test, a nutrient test. You're going to get like $5,000 worth of testing. But the minute anything comes back in one of those gut-based tests, it's like all of it gets chucked out the window and doesn't matter anymore. And heaven forbid, like your lifestyle, your sleep, your stress, nothing else matters until you eradicate the SIBO. Nothing else matters until you heal the leaky gut.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, and they get those blinders on that we talk about, and they laser in on the SIBO or the leaky gut or the candida to the detriment of everything else. And like, that's not how real healing works. But this kind of framework gives you permission to do that.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of research from, especially microbiome research, where it's, oh, we're seeing microbiome disturbances or like low diversity and all these conditions, and we're seeing low good bugs and a lot of these conditions. And I think those things could be totally true. But, you know, is that the cause of the issue? Probably not. There's a lot of different reasons why someone develops low bifido or develops low diversity. Is it that the diet isn't diverse enough, or the diet does? And there's that goes for diversity of nutrients, diversity of fibers, things like that. If you're stressed out all the time, that's going to lead to disease, and it's also going to lead to microbiome changes. If you get poor sleep, it's going to lead to dysfunction and disease, as well as microbiome changes. Like, there's so many different layers, like diet and lifestyle layers, that lead to disease. It's usually not all of a sudden like our microbiomes are just disturbed and then all the disease blows up. Yeah. Or like you're at risk for all these different diseases then. I think it's a much more diet and lifestyle problem usually. Now, again, I think there's genetics at play, and there's other factors too that certainly come into play with different diseases and things like that. But I think a lot of these chronic diseases that are being linked to gut stuff, you could probably really dig to the root of the root being a diet and lifestyle in a huge way, and then genetics also. And that impacts the microbiome. So there's correlation between microbiome changes and something like neurological conditions. And there can be interplay. But again, to say like the microbiome is responsible for anxiety and depression or responsible for Parkinson's disease or whatever it is, like I think that
it's a stretch.
Right, it's a stretch, and you're not really seeing the root of the root. You're just seeing kind of some of these factors that come into play a lot of times when diet and lifestyle factors are not necessarily where they need to be, or there's genetic factors and other things at play.
Well, it may be a way to conceptualize this idea more accurately is I think all disease begins in the gut, paints a picture of something happening sequentially,
Right.
almost like knocking over dominoes, right? Like the first domino knocks over and that tips into the second one,
Mhm.
and then the second one tips into the third. And it's a series of events, and everything is kind of contingent on that first domino falling down. But it's not that linear in the human body. So maybe a better model for this would be that of a spider web, where everything is connected, but it's not like, it's not to say that this one thread started at all.
Right.
It's all of the threads are connected. So if you theoretically took a spider web and pulled on one spoke of it, the rest of the spider web is going to move.
Right.
And if you pull on the other side, the whole spider web is going to move. But again, it's not to say that that one spoke of the spider web started it all or is solely responsible for everything.
Right.
And I like the idea that you paint too, which is, again, correlation does not equal causation. I could think of a million examples of this. Like let's paint a hypothetical picture, right? Somebody has high blood sugar, or let's even say that they have type 2 diabetes, right? And they also get diagnosed with leaky gut, dysbiosis, maybe SIBO, maybe candida. And the assumption is, especially right now with the literature, is like, oh, metabolic disease and type 2 diabetes is like a microbiome thing, and you just need more akkermansia. You need to take spore probiotics to seal up your leaky gut, and then the diabetes will go away. Well, what if that person also has consumed a lot of simple carbohydrates and very little fiber their whole life?
Right.
What if they have not gotten the diversity, the color, the polyphenols their whole life? What if they've been stressed? What if they have sleep apnea, and the sleep apnea is fucking up their blood sugar regulation and their microbiome at the same time? Like, it's not fair to say that the microbiome or the leaky gut or the gut stuff is specifically driving the diabetes, but I do think they're connected, and it's a two-way street for that matter.
Right. Especially once like the ball gets rolling too, if the microbiome becomes disturbed, it's like, ooh, there's going to be problems across time with things like diabetes. Like, it's still something to address. And I think, from my standpoint too, I know this episode was inspired a little bit by a post I saw on the interwebs. Actually, it was an Instagram post, but it was by a popular SIBO person. I'll just say that.
If you've read anything about SIBO, you definitely know her name.
Right.
Like, I'll just say that. She's very well regarded in the SIBO space.
But it's the post says SIBO and its impact on health, and it lists like basically every condition known to man: gastrointestinal disorders, autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, endocrine disorders, nephrological, so like kidney stuff, dermatological issues, neurological diseases, developmental disorders, mental disorders, genetic diseases, gastrointestinal cancer.
Genetic diseases. Can we just pause at that one specifically?
I know.
How is SIBO going to cause a genetic disease?
I do not know. Let's see because she expands on each one. Oh, genetic predispositions can influence SIBO development and severity.
I don't like, show me the evidence. I feel like this is my Jerry Maguire moment. Like, show me the money. Show me the evidence
Right.
that is true.
But she goes into each one of these. And again, like most of people that develop disease, there's some dysfunction. There's definitely biological dysfunction going on. The microbiome could be a piece of that, like what you're saying. Like it's a spider web. I like that analogy. But to just say like SIBO's to blame for all these conditions is
For
essentially
all of
what
humankind's ailments.
It's kind of what the post is saying. And maybe, giving her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, she would hopefully not think that, but who knows? But yeah, it paints the picture, like you said. If we just get rid of SIBO, my neurological conditions will go away.
My anxiety will go away.
My anxiety, my dermatological conditions will go away. And again, like things could potentially get better if you had SIBO and treated it. But, unless you investigate maybe why the SIBO was there to begin with, or why you had microbiome disturbances to begin with, you're going to really have trouble moving forward. And again, sometimes you're just predisposed to certain issues too. And once they start, you can't really solve them per se. Like I'm thinking autoimmunity. Sometimes, again, autoimmunity is an interesting one, I think, in the holistic space because you can kind of put it into remission. But the idea, I think sometimes the functional space is bad about painting this idea of like, you can cure it. And they don't say it, but they kind of paint this.
They imply it.
They imply it of like, oh, if you just eat AIP forever, you're going to cure it. And it's like, well, no. Like any stressor could kind of flare up autoimmunity to a degree. And people can live full, happy lives with autoimmune disease. But the idea of like, if you just cure the SIBO, your Hashimoto's is going to go away, or your, your celiac disease or something is going to go away, is not necessarily a great message to send either. So yeah, I saw that post and was like, ooh, this makes me cringe a little bit. And again, it leads people on this desperate mission and this very horse blinder mission, just focusing on the SIBO when the actual layers of, why you might have SIBO or why you might have dysbiosis in general is probably the best question. The dysbiosis isn't inherently usually like the problem by itself. There could be exceptions to that if someone took a bunch of antibiotics or something for an infection. There could be exceptions to that. And I will say too, like growing up as a 90s kid, I hope we're getting a little bit better with antibiotics, but I don't necessarily think that, considering what I've seen with like some of the antibiotic use with my friends and things that have kids. It's like a hard line because I'm happy we have antibiotics. They're very helpful, and I think that we should use them wisely. But, I think
wisely is the important word.
Yeah, I put it in my book. I could probably find it here quickly, but I know, we use a lot of antibiotics before certain ages. So it does set us up to maybe have some microbiome issues across time, but your diet and lifestyle can still play such a huge role in microbiome health. But there could be situations where maybe something like a big antibiotic hit could, for a period of time, be like a true
trigger or root cause.
True trigger or root cause. But usually a lot of the microbiome stuff, I think, can be shifted with diet and lifestyle, or, maybe some supplemental support, things like that. Yeah. But even that, like, even if your microbiome looks pretty good, and I know we've worked with people too, where like, there's nothing inherently like crazy about their microbiome, but they still have issues.
And so, vice versa.
Right.
My microbiome looks iffy on stool testing because I grew up similarly, child of the 80s and 90s, and I had a lot of antibiotics. And despite my microbiome looking like there's something to be desired, I feel fine.
Right.
So, and again, we recently talked about the best and worst stool testing, and one of the themes from that episode was testing is neat. Maybe it can give you a teensy bit of guidance, but it's not nearly as useful and reliable and concrete as you've been led to believe that it is.
Right.
And so, maybe there's something else in my microbiome that we don't even have a name for yet. And that's like holding the show together and keeping me reasonably healthy.
Right.
And maybe there's some bad boogeyman out there that we haven't identified yet, or maybe it's not the microbiome at all. It's something else. But, this is one of those episodes, I think, that can be really important for people to hear, but it's also kind of a mind fuck, if you pardon the expression.
Right.
Because again, people get so sucked into posts like that. And, to be clear, like there are people with very impressive accolades and degrees, more impressive than ours by, common standards like MD, ND, DO. There are very smart, well-educated people putting forth this content that makes you believe that the gut, the dysbiosis, the SIBO, the candida, the leaky gut is all that ever matters. And, it makes me think of that episode we did a while back about the truth about functional medicine. And I think I might have brought this up, but I don't remember. But there's an awful lot of undertones of sleazy marketing in functional medicine that I really do not like. And this is a good example. Like for this woman who has made a name for herself being a SIBO expert, if she can create a social media post that scares the willikers out of everybody and makes everyone believe that SIBO is like the key to all of your problems ever, that is fantastic marketing for her business. She's going to make more money with appointments and supplement sales and commissions and guest appearances on summits or whatever it might be. So, it's like you almost have to take things like this with a huge grain of salt, because there is a huge financial incentive for people to make posts like this that they either people get so caught up into one universe and they're like sipping the Kool-Aid and they themselves have the blinders on and they themselves believe this wholeheartedly. And they really can't see the truth because they're so biased. Or again, maybe there are some bad cards out there who are genuinely posting things that they know to not be true or things that they know to be clickbaity for the sake of marketing their business.
Right.
But it's really frustrating because again, I think it paints this picture. You need to be testing for SIBO over and over and over again, because the only way you're ever going to get healthy is to get rid of the SIBO. And if you're not testing, well, what the fuck are you doing? Right.
Right.
So there's the heavy reliance on testing. And, again, nothing else matters. You don't need to worry about sleep or stress or blood sugar or nutrients or vitamin B12. Nothing else matters. You just have to laser in on the SIBO. And that is your whole worldview now. And it's really scary.
Yeah. I think anytime something seems almost too linear, it probably
too good to be true.
Yeah, it probably is. I saw a recent post too by another popular functional medicine proponent talking about the links between, the microbiome and anxiety. And again, like there's certainly links, but his whole take was like, if you fix the microbiome, your anxiety will go away. And it's like,
let's ignore your upbringing, your traumas,
how your nervous system's wired
idiosyncrasies, neuroplasticity, the fact that these pathways are wired.
Your nutrition, your lifestyle. And again, like, I'm sure he might have mentioned like some of those things, like nutrition, lifestyle, but like the whole emphasis it was a video of the video was again about the microbiome. And of course, this person sells probiotics. Or is like attached to a company that sells probiotics. And he's kind of the figurehead. So it's like, you're watching these things and it's like, this is so frustrating. Like I as someone that struggles with anxiety and I think historically could have been sucked into this message, it was just frustrating to see because, you know, there's so many other factors to consider. And again, maybe the microbiome's one factor as like a bottom up type of approach to affect your nervous system and your neurology and things like that. But, you know, there's so many other factors that could come into play for someone that's struggling with anxiety. For instance, like things like a B12 deficiency could lead to depression and anxiety. Like, how do you explain that away? Like, not all anxiety can come from the microbiome. It's interesting too, because we've been bringing up Chris Masterjohn a lot lately, but he kind of has, I think, some like OCD tendencies if he gets like off. He recently posted something about like an OCD flare. But it was interesting because he's talked about anxiety in terms of like nutrition related things. But in this particular post, he talked all about like basically doing a lot of present moment work versus like analysis type work and like rumination. It gets you into trouble. So it's kind of all about like shifting his mindset a little bit and like, you know, not listening to so many podcasts, like kind of going outside more, trying to be present in the moment more, things like that. Different strategies to help him get out of kind of the OCD flare that he was in. I think he had been writing, like really hardcore writing his book or something, and it kind of flared things up because it OCD can make you like ruminate about certain things and maybe critique and overthink certain things. So, but again, like it was like, okay, there's some balance here. He's talking a little about nutrition, things like that. But, you know, I think we need people like that where there's a little bit more balanced, where it's not just like, it's all one thing. You know, it's all anxiety is the microbiome. Like there's so many different factors, and it's just, I think it's the simplicity is so enticing at times because, like you said, like it feels okay if I just get this probiotic that this guy's asking or that this guy's talking about, maybe things will get better. If I just kill the SIBO, things will get better. And again, maybe they do a little bit, but it usually leads people on a wild goose chase where it's like, well, I'm not better, but maybe there's another microbiome thing I need. Maybe I just need to do a different set of herbals, or maybe I need to do antibiotic like rifaximin.
Maybe I really have candida. Maybe it's really this.
Maybe it's a parasite. I feel like that's kind of the progression sometimes with clients. And again, like I understand where they're coming from and the landscape that they're coming from, but it's like, oh, we treated the SIBO and maybe it's parasite. Maybe we're totally off. It's another microbiome issue. And it's like, well, maybe it's something else. That's not microbiome.
Maybe you need to suck it up, Buttercup, and just do the work, right? Like, I feel like this conversation, especially the anxiety, mental health piece of it, is so, it's so tricky because realistically, like we said, there's going to be, you know, stressors, relationships, triggers, traumas, the way you were raised. Like if you were raised with super anxious parents, there's a higher likelihood that you will have anxiety, and they kind of imprinted that on you and you learn that behavior. We literally have neurons in our brain called mirror neurons. And it's, again, they are looking at the people around you and they are learning to mirror or mimic the people around you. And that's a lot of how children learn in particular, is that they have I don't know if they have a greater quantity or more activity with their mirror neuron pathways, but it's not like a cognitive, oh, I'm going to rationalize and like explain why this is the letter A or like why this makes a sound. Children learn how to talk and they learn their behavior from observing the people around them and mirroring that. So again, like think of a person who grew up with parents that have health anxiety or health OCD or a lot of anxiety or a lot of, you know, trauma kind of stuff that they never resolved, or parents who fight a lot, or there's a lot of tension, or they felt unsafe in their childhood. Like, these are the harder things to tackle. Or if you're in an unhappy, unsafe relationship, if you know, have a really stressful, awful job, if you hate your commute, if you have no friends, there are so many like societal relationship kind of human interaction parts to anxiety and depression. And it's messy and it's scary and it's icky and nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody wants to go up to their toxic, nasty spouse and say, I'm leaving you, mofo. We're getting a divorce. Like nobody, again,
it's much easier to buy the probiotic.
Yes. And avoid the things that you actually need to do. We painted this before in another episode, but there was an analogy of a dog that's howling in pain, like, rawr, rawr, and it's sitting on a nail. And you're like, well, get off the nail and the pain will go away. But the dog is more, I don't know why it's a dog, by the way. Like it could easily be a human in this analogy, but this is the way I heard it. So this is the way I'm going to teach it. We would rather stay with that familiar pain or that familiar unpleasantness rather than getting up off the nail and risking more pain for just a moment and then relief following that. But we're so terrified of the idea of more pain or more discomfort or more messiness. We would actually rather stay with our ass on that nail howling in pain. And again, it's like, we would rather stay in the bad relationship. We would rather stay with, the traumas and the shit that we've carried around our whole life rather than actually doing the work and trying to process them and trying to grow as a person. It's so much easier and tempting and alluring to just buy a magical probiotic that's going to cure everything that ails you.
Right. Yeah, totally. Again, I think the magic bullet mindset too gets a bit more baked into our culture just with like direct to consumer ads. Like our whole life we've been hearing, if you have heartburn from eating those 5 hot dogs, that always made me laugh at like the PPI commercials sometimes where it's like, have you just wanted to enjoy 3 hot dogs at the baseball game? Well, you can do that with the PPI. I know. Some of those commercials always cracked me up.
The one that got me was years ago. Remember they had Larry the Cable Guy advertising Prilosec? And he's like, I take Prilosec now. And it's like, I'm sorry, is Larry the Cable Guy like the person we're trying to model here in society?
Right.
I don't know if this is really a good role model for the general public.
Yeah, that's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, again, I think that the direct to consumer advertising, which I think we're one of only like 3 or 4 countries that do it, definitely creates this.
2. I think it's just us in New Zealand, if I remember right.
You could be right, but I know it's like us in very few other places that allow direct to consumer advertising. And I do think that models kind of how we see problems. And again, there's an easy fix or a way that I can eliminate this pain without, any consequence or without any work.
Well, I think that pharmaceuticals as a whole make us more likely to get into that like instant gratification kind of headspace. Because whether you see an advertisement on TV or not, whether or not you've seen that versus just your experience with it, if you have a headache and then you take Tylenol, you generally feel better pretty quickly, like within half an hour. And it's, prescriptions and over-the-counter medications, they're powerful and they're generally fast acting. Again, like you could have inflammation and then you take prednisone and a couple hours later you're feeling pretty good. And there's
you might
a
even
lot
feel
of other
better
examples.
than before.
Yeah,
I remember it was cracking up. One time my mom had to take steroids. Like I forget what for, but we were going on like a ski trip. And my dad always cracked up. Like, she had never skied better than the week she was on steroids for like whatever issue. Maybe it was like a skin thing or something. I don't know. She wasn't on them super long, but my dad was cracking up like on the ski trip because she had so much like stamina and energy. And it was just funny.
She's a superhuman.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. There was something, we had Jenna Overball on way back. It doesn't feel that long ago, but it was way back in like the 105 or 106.
Yeah.
And she's a therapist that specializes in OCD and anxiety. And she recently posted something, and I forget what she called it, like the model. But basically, her whole point was that some people with anxiety don't need one-on-one therapy. That's kind of like a higher rung on the ladder. some people can do group work, or some people can do, like, you could kind of go up on the ladder and see like how much support you need. And I think that's the same way with like meds. It's like, okay, you can try like some self-help stuff. Maybe you try like a program that's run by someone. Maybe you try like group therapy. Maybe you try one-on-one therapy. Maybe then, like, if there's still some issues that need resolved, like maybe meds make sense at that point. I don't think either of us are against pharmaceuticals, but I think again, it's kind of like this rung of, okay, you kind of go through a process and see how much progress you can make.
Gradually escalating,
right,
if you will.
Right.
But here's the problem, my dear. A lot of people with anxiety believe that they are at the tippity top of that ladder. Right. So like we see this all the damn time. I see this. So as of the recording of this episode, I'm not taking on one-on-one clients right now. And I haven't been for probably close to 6 months at this point. And, when we get somebody who inquires or reaches out to my office, my assistant will generally tell them about FODMAP freedom, because that's really what I'm focusing on more now. And pretty much unanimously, like 99.9% of people are like, no, but I need the one-on-one.
Right.
I need her to like look at my GI map and stuff. And it's like, no, you don't.
Right.
I'm sorry, like not to sound like a heinous bitch, but really 99.9% of you actually don't need me to like look at your stuff one-on-one. You would do really well in a group setting. But again, everybody comes in believing in their heart of hearts that they are the sickest, most specialist case, and that they couldn't possibly get better in a group setting. And so that's the tricky part, is like, ideally you would climb that ladder and only progress to the one-on-one stuff if you really actually need it. Right. And you like fail all the other stuff, so to speak. But not a lot of people, particularly with anxiety, are willing to climb that ladder gradually. They just want to jump the gun and go straight for like the biggest thing.
Right. Well, I agree. I think there's probably some bias internally that leads you to think like, ooh, maybe it's like the negativity bias. I'm the worst case possible and I need, but you're right.
Anxiety. Like
I've seen the same situation with like me restarting this program. Like people have reached out and be like, oh, I have a program. They're like, no, I really need that one-on-one. And the interesting thing too, I remember years ago, I did one-on-one work with Laura Schoenfeld for like business coaching type stuff. And then she had a discount on her NBA program, which is like some of the similar stuff, but like laid out in a program. And weirdly, I like probably got more out of the program just because how it was laid out. I could see the blind spots easier.
I think also, I don't know if I think it would be largely the same for business coaching too, but one of several reasons why I'm focusing more on FODMAP freedom right now, and I'm taking a break from my one-on-one work, kind of indefinitely at this point, is that I've actually found that FODMAP freedom is more effective than my one-on-one. And I think that one of the things that I've wrapped my head around here is that, and to be clear, it's not that I like suck at my job. I think that my one-on-one service is fine and good and great, but it's just, I've started to feel like in a weird way, it's wrong for me to charge way more for something that either gets the same results or not as good of results, when I could work with somebody in FODMAP freedom for cheaper and get better results for them. Right. I don't want to take your money and do the one-on-one if I know damn well FODMAP freedom would work for you and be cheaper. But I think that a part of it for me is, I think that the dynamic of me, the expert, telling you what's wrong and telling you what you have to do doesn't actually work nearly as well as we think it does. Right. Like and to paint a more extreme version of this, if somebody's a smoker and they get told by a doctor or a loved one with a wagging finger, you need to stop smoking, how likely is that person to quit smoking? 0.00001% likelihood, maybe? Like, no, they're going to be like, F this. Nope, I'm going to keep smoking my cigs. It's too hard. I don't want to, whatever. And they're not going to take action. Versus, like, in the group format, if I can educate you and I can show you the science and the rationale and kind of lead you through a journey from start to finish, most important to least important. And along that journey, you're learning things that make you reflect on your own situation and have aha moments and go, oh, I think this is important for me. And then we get to talk about it in a Q&A and kind of like chew on it together. That is so much more effective. And there's a name for this. I don't remember what it is now, but I remember this came up in a motivational interviewing class once. And there were 2 examples that they gave in pop culture that I thought were perfect. First of all, Amy, have you seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
It's been a really long time, but yes.
Okay. Do you remember the scene? We're going to go back. Okay. Do you remember the scene where the main character wants to go to college to like learn computers or whatever?
Yeah.
And they have to convince the dad to let her go because he's like super old school and he thinks, you know, the woman belongs in the kitchen or whatever. And so the wife, like the mom character, I forget their names now, but the wife is like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And the wife, the aunt, and the main character go in there. And they basically trick Gus into thinking it's his idea.
Right.
And then when he comes up with the idea, they're like, that's brilliant.
Right.
And they're like patting him on the back. And he's like, yeah. Again, if they told him Tula wants to go to college, we need to do this, he probably would have resisted. But because it was his idea, and he thinks that he's the genius that came up with the solution, he's like, fuck yeah, this is the best idea I've ever had in my life. Yeah.
Right.
And the other pop culture reference I'll share briefly, were you a fan of The Little Mermaid growing up?
I mean, I didn't dislike it, but I wouldn't say I was like a huge fan.
It was my shiznit.
Okay.
I would get up on the back of the couch and I would like do the dramatic like thing, like the waves, like I was up on the rock, like Ariel. I would say my parents were legitimately concerned that I was going to wear out the VHS tape because I watched it so much. Yes, I'm that old. So anyway, my point in sharing that is, do you remember the scene from The Little Mermaid under the sea where Sebastian is literally just lecturing Ariel and telling her all the millions of reasons why the ocean is amazing and why she should not go up on land? What is the end of that song, Amy?
I don't
You don't have to sing it. I mean, like the scene, he puts on this extravagant show and gives her a million reasons why she should stay in the ocean. Right. And then he turns around only to realize she's gone.
Right.
She swam away and went to like the Sea Witch or whatever.
Right, to get her legs.
Yeah, to get her legs. And she, again, like lecturing and like one person telling another person what they should do generally doesn't work. But again, if you can learn in a podcast like this or something like our group coaching programs, and then you get to like have a conversation about what you learned and learn how to apply it in your real life, I think that's just way more effective than the one-on-one thing.
I agree. And I think you're right.
I forget how we got on this tangent though.
I know. But the doubt, I would say a lot of people that are very adamant about one-on-one, like you said, probably have a higher degree of like anxiety or perfectionism, like wanting to get certainty around their issues. And again, like someone maybe who's more open to a program would be less, I mean, still maybe want some degree of like certainty, but not to the level of maybe someone working one-on-one, which probably plays into like success overall too, like more rigidity versus more mental flexibility. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that there is something about human nature of like maybe being more defensive when you're working one-on-one and pointing out blind spots and things that need to be worked on that aren't as popular or not as much discussed in the mainstream like IBS or SIBO world versus if you're delivering them in like in a way where you're almost like re-educating and them being able to kind of come to their own conclusion seems to be more beneficial. I agree.
Well, and I know like for my program, at least, I have a lot of research and the science and the why behind the recommendations built into that. And I think that can help too. Like, even if you have hour-long appointments with somebody, you only get so much time to really share the why and the science. And understanding that, I think, can help. And one really great example is the stress connection. Like, there's a buttload of research on stress chemistry, vagal tone, gut-brain axis kind of stuff. And I can share that in a useful way in a group coaching setting. Like, I have a lecture about the vagus nerve. I have a lecture about like the gut-brain connection, another one about motility. And I can kind of like piece that together in a cohesive scientific way. But if I'm with you in a one-on-one appointment and I bring up, hey, like, I think that stress is actually a pretty big factor for you. Let's examine this. Let's talk about getting you in with a therapist or doing something for your anxiety. The automatic response from a lot of people is to get defensive or feel like I'm gaslighting them and saying like, oh, it's just in my head, huh? And I no joke, I had a patient that I was working with and I brought up, I think in a pretty chill way, like, I'm not a bitch, guys. Like, I was cool about it, but I brought up like, hey, I really think that stress and mental health is a really big part of this. Maybe we should take a breather from the killing the SIBO, eradicating SIBO conversation, and maybe we should focus on that. And she sent me this big, long portal message and basically said, I'm willing to continue working with you if you promise to never bring up stress again.
Yeah.
And I responded back. I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. No. Like, you're asking me to completely ignore one huge facet of human health and human existence. Like, you can't make something that fundamental off limits. That's like saying you have to pinky promise to never bring up blood sugar or sleep.
Or my smoking or something.
Yeah, or my smoking. And it's like, no, I can't guarantee, I cannot in good conscience work with you and let you think that this is going to work for you if you choose to ignore something that fundamentally important. And by the way, the fact that you're so defensive about this right now confirms that stress is a big piece of it for you.
Right.
Like, the fact that you're so triggered indicates that I was right. But anyways, and we parted ways, and like, I hope she's doing well. But again, it's this different dynamic of me, the expert, telling you, hey, this is a problem. Oftentimes doesn't go as smoothly as we think it will. It's more effective to educate.
Well, and I think bringing it back to even the point of the episode, I know we've been kind of on a tangential
journey.
Yeah. Well, is like, this is exactly what happens when so much focus is on the gut. It's like the second you bring up stress, people are like, no, it's just my SIBO. Yeah. Or like, no, it's
the
my
stress
SIBO.
Doesn't matter. Can't you see I have SIBO?
I wouldn't be stressed if it wasn't the SIBO. Like, it's all that conversation that gets that's so hard to overcome when, again, the horse blinders are on just the gut or just the microbiome or just the SIBO. And it's like, no, ma'am. We have to like really be focusing on, and you see this all the time. I know we've talked about like how there was someone in your program who like you realized at the very last appointment maybe hadn't done chronometer. Sometimes I'll see that with patients where like I'm like, oh, have we done chronometer yet? And it's been like the third or fourth session and I keep asking and they haven't tracked. And it's like, no, this is like very important. We have to like understand what your nutrition looks like.
And as the kids say, it's really sus when you don't do something that fundamental and that easy to do. Like, I would understand if I was asking you to drive to Tallahassee, Florida to see one particular therapist that's going to cost $5,000 per session. And also they're going to like inject some crazy thing into your veins. If I was asking for something that insane, I would understand it would take more convincing. But like, it's a free app and it takes maybe 5 minutes a day to log your food total. And I know because I have an app that tracks my use of apps throughout the day. And like the last time I did chronometer, it took me 4 minutes and 20 seconds to log all of my food for the entire day. Right. That's how long I was on that app for that particular day.
Right. So, and again, I think there could be like I said, the anomaly where maybe someone's had disordered eating and it's like, oh, maybe it makes sense not to track. But for the majority of people, like if that's a recommendation, again, sometimes people, overlook it. Or again, like they kind of underestimate too, like when I give them the guidance of like, whoa, you're way under. This could be a root cause. Then they're asking me like, what's the root cause? And I'm like, well, we just went over how like you're under eating by a lot of calories. Like that inherently is going to be some degree of a factor for you. I don't know if it will alleviate all your symptoms, but like we have to cover that base in order for the gut to function optimally, in order for your whole body to function optimally. So it's again, sometimes I think, there's so much more effort because of the marketing, because of kind of the messaging around the SIBO stuff versus, again, the other things. And it's to the detriment of everyone's journeys, really.
Well, and here's something too, because you touched on like the client asking you, well, what's the root cause? And you're like,
right.
Like we just discussed.
Yeah.
And I think part of the confusion that gets tangled up in this is the idea of defining a root cause. Because really there are 3 types of root causes that are keeping people unwell, but we tend to only focus on one type of root cause in like mainstream functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, etc. There's, and I'm going to paint the picture once again of the cliff metaphor, right? Like in this example, if your feet are on solid ground, up on top of the ground, you feel good. And this could be, you don't have a migraine that day, you don't have diarrhea, you have good energy, whatever feeling good means to you. If you go off the edge of that cliff and fall off, that's the representation of you feeling poorly or having a symptom or having a flare. So maybe you're bloated, maybe you have diarrhea, maybe you have an eczema flare, whatever it might be. And so what people, again, practitioners and patients alike, what people tend to focus on the most, almost exclusively, is the thing that shoves you off the cliff, right? The trigger, the thing where it's like, oh, I felt fine, then this happened, then I didn't feel fine. And it happened that one fateful Tuesday. I took antibiotics and then I took a PPI and then I had food poisoning and then I was hit by a bus and then whatever it might be. But there are 2 other types of root causes that I think are way more relevant for people's healing journeys. First of all, there's the type of root cause where you're inching your way closer to the edge of the cliff.
Right.
Right? Like maybe that trigger wouldn't have screwed you up so bad if you weren't 3 inches away from the edge of the cliff to begin with. You felt good. Your feet were on solid ground, so you felt fine.
This would be like an example of like, well, I've never gotten good sleep. Like as a objection to working on sleep. Yeah. It's like, well, that pushed you closer. Maybe the antibiotics threw you over the edge.
Yeah.
But if you've always had kind of poor sleep, that's kind of affecting your resilience over time. It's kind of keeping you.
Bingo. And that's the thing. You lacked resilience in the first place. So it was that much easier for the gluten or the infection or the whatever to knock your ass off that cliff.
Right.
And yeah, you're right, people will use these as a defense of why the thing we're talking about doesn't matter.
Right.
Well, but I've been a vegan for 10 years and I felt fine until 3 years ago. Okay, but like maybe that inched your ass close to the cliff and you've had raging deficiencies for a while. And maybe you were able to cope with those to a certain degree up until this point, until you got the food poisoning or whatever it might be. The other flavor of root cause is, let's say that you're off the cliff and you feel terrible and you're hanging on by your fingernails, just clinging to the edge of that cliff and you're trying to pull yourself up to the best of your ability. Well, let's paint 2 different scenarios. Let's say that you are on the edge of the cliff, roll with me on this one, and you're naked, butt naked, nothing on your body. And then in the second scenario, you are not only fully clothed, but you are wearing a backpack that weighs 50 pounds. Which version of you is going to be able to pull yourself up off that cliff more easily? The one who is not weighed down by clothing and backpacks alike, or the version of you that's carrying an extra 50 plus pounds. And now you have to be that much stronger and that much more resilient to get your butt up on that cliff. And again, this is where something like sleep and stress and nutrition could play a role. Yeah, maybe it wasn't your shitty sleep that threw your butt off the cliff, but it's weighing you down and it's making it hard for your body to do its job and function. It's still a root cause. It's still keeping you stuck, even if it wasn't the initiating trigger that nudged you over the edge. And again, it's like when you're hyper focused on the gut, and again, the antibiotics, the food poisoning, the PPI, the whatever is the only thing that matters to you. And you're only focused on the trigger and you're ignoring these other types of root causes. This is what actually keeps you stuck.
Right. Right. 100%.
Yeah. So,
so
I
tricky.
think the theme of the episode is probably abundantly clear, but do we want to give a little 30-second summary of the episode? So what should people not do and what should people do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best thing you can do, especially if you've been very hyper focused on SIBO or like your microbiome, is to try to zoom out a little bit and think about the fundamental unsexy basics that we always talk about. I think is core. I think that that's probably the biggest message, maybe, is if you're just so zoomed in, it can lead you astray and lead to a lot of blind spots. So the more you can sort of zoom out, and even if you have to take a break, I know you'd mentioned it with a previous patient. I actually think that could be really helpful for certain people of just like, okay, let me just like take a break from looking at this thing. Like sometimes the more you look at something, the more confused you'll get. Even though it feels the opposite. Like the more you think you'll look at it, the more you'll have understanding of the problem. But a lot of times that's not the actual case. It just leads to more doubts and confusion. And it's like you just need a break. So yeah, I think that's how I would view it. It's like, oh, we need to zoom out a bit from just seeing everything being driven by gut stuff. And if you're in that mindset, kind of trying to slowly work yourself out of that, and trying to see being more open-minded to other strategies too.
Yeah. And maybe this will help too. Here's maybe another way to word it. Instead of thinking, how do I treat the leaky gut? How do I treat the SIBO? How do I treat the candida? How do I treat or cure or eradicate the thing? Try a mindset shift of what does a human body, what does a microbiome, what does a human spirit need to be healthy? And start with that. Like, come at it from an angle of, I want to be here. I want to be healthy. Who do I need to be? What do I need to be doing? What actions should I be taking? If your vision of a healthy person is somebody eating a particular diet, interacting with friends and family, getting a good night's sleep, prioritizing movement, you want to start being that person before you're actually that person.
Right.
And I borrowed this from a business coaching guy, James Wedmore, but he talks a lot in his world about the idea of have, do, be. Like, when I have this, I will do this, and then I will be this. When I have this amount of revenue in my business, then I will be successful, and then I will do things that a successful person would do. And he tells you to flip it around.
Right.
Like, you want to do the things and be the person before you actually become successful, before you actually hit that goal. And that way you're like channeling that in the universe, but you're doing the things that you need to get there.
Right.
You can't just magically, get to a certain point with your health and then be like, okay, today is the day I'm going to eat healthy. Like, no, you need to eat healthy to get to that place that you want to be at. So have, do, be versus be, do, have. Your choice. But I think one of those works a heck of a lot better than the other.
Yes, I agree. I love it. Love it, live it, breathe it. the IBS Freedom Podcast.
That's right. Old Hippocrates got a show in today. I know he probably passed away 2,000 years ago, but we put him in his place today, Amy. By God.
Hopefully he's not rolling in his grave or something. Those damn IBS Freedom podcasters.
I mean, I feel like from the little bit I know of Hippocrates, I feel like if he was as smart as we think he is, I think he probably would appreciate this kind of a conversation. And he probably knew darn well that quote was a little bit oversimplified. So does all disease begin in the gut? No, it's all connected though. So you probably should care about all of your bits, not just your gut.
Right.
That's about the best summary I could give.
Mm-hmm. Love it.